grace, and we talk about it in such soothing tones, and we sing about it. And does it ever occur to anybody that we really don't know what we're talking about generally? Because it has gotten such a bastardized sense about it. We love to use it, particularly to get out of consequences, but I don't know. I begin to wonder if we really understand what grace is. As a matter of fact, I think sometimes we end up thinking that it's kind of a weak form of being nice, even. And so I want to spend some time talking about that. We're in the midst of a series, and it's called Accepting Grace. But before I do that, I guess I should introduce myself. I am Dr. Ray Mitch, your host for the Psych Monologues. That's what you're listening to if you stumbled onto this out of curiosity, or you had to fulfill a bribe or a bet, and sorry that you're here. But the Psych Monologues, hopefully we can make it worth your while for the next 25 minutes or so. The Psych Monologues is a podcast that I created to look at and explore our journey toward wholeness within ourselves, in our relationships, and ultimately with God. And that's part of the conversation that I am having. Actually, it's a monologue because that's what it's called. So we're going to start out this week, brand new week. Today is January 17th. And I want to try to catch us up a little bit because I mentioned we're in the middle of this series called Accepting Grace. And some question that always seems to come up, and I don't know that we ever articulate it directly, and that is why is it so hard for me, to accept grace at all? Because after all, it's a high value. As Philip Yancey once said, it is the last best word. We have a lot of our language is focused in around grace, graciousness, and saying grace before a meal, and someone who moves with such grace. See, that word is embedded in our language in a lot of places. Even the worst part of it is a phrase that oftentimes I will use when somebody has kind of gotten mud on their face and they are persona non grata, which is Latin for person without grace. Or we refer to people high in positions of leadership or authority or other things, and certainly at least at one point in the Catholic Church, they're referred to as your grace. So why do a series like this? I mean, isn't grace easy to accept? And what I'm finding out is no, it's not. As a matter of fact, it would almost be easier if somebody just simply gave us what we believe we deserve. And grace doesn't do that. And therefore, then, we feel like we've got to do something to manage what makes things so out of control. Because that's what grace does, is it turns the world on its head. It turns our world, my world, on its head. Because if I do something wrong, then I get punished. And if I do something wrong, then I need to provide some kind of retribution or recompense or something that will balance the scales again. But grace doesn't do that at all. As a matter of fact, in many ways, and this may or may not be a way that people understand God, but Scripture makes it really clear that He loved us and forgave us and offered us grace while we were still hating Him. Which, again, like I said, it's kind of turning the world on its head, which is exactly what makes it so remarkable. And I would suggest it also makes it so tough to accept. Because I want to be able to have a trade, and I can justify lowering myself or humbling myself to accept such grace, which, if there's a trade, it isn't grace. It's a simply a trade. It's a commodity. I give that person something and they give me something in return, and it's called grace. That's not grace. So the thing I want to put out here as we're coming near to landing this series that I've been on is that we love to talk and sing about grace, but that's partly because we have such a jacked up understanding of what grace is. And singing and talking about grace is one thing, but living in grace or accepting grace is something entirely different. It doesn't remove the consequences. Sometimes that's part of our jacked up understanding of grace, is that we think if I receive grace, then I don't have consequences. But I would suggest to you that receiving grace doesn't remove the consequences, but does remove the condemnation, which I think is pretty remarkable, which makes it even possible for me to survive the consequences, learn from what has happened, and make some decisions to do it differently the next time around. And the motivation isn't one of avoiding punishment, but the motivation is to move more deeply into the relationship with somebody who has offered me this remarkable thing that we call grace. So we've been developing this metaphor in this series of what I refer to as the old country and the new country. The old country is the graceless place, where there are characteristics that we've been unpacking over the last few weeks that we're comfortable with. We know very well. We know how the system works. We know how to do the dance. We know how to say the words. We know how to do all the necessary things to keep everything nice and even and cool, and nobody gets out of control or anything like that. And we all decide that we're going to play this little game together and make sure that we get the dance steps right. And I won't step on your toes if you don't step on mine. In other words, you do you and I'll do me. So we've been looking at a variety of characteristics between the old country, like I said, and the new country, which is built on grace. And in spite of all of our bluster about how wonderful grace is, when we arrive at the new country, quite honestly, I'm not sure we like it very well. Quite honestly, because I don't know how to behave. I don't know the conventions. I don't seem to know the language. And who in their right mind would want to sit and deal with that discomfort? But if I want to move so forcefully, so purposefully into the new country, then I have to be willing to learn the new ways that are there. And so here are a couple more things, a couple more characteristics to distinguish the old country and the new. And again, what we've been talking about is there's a pretty well-worn path between the old country and the new country, because even though we've gotten enticed, or we have found walking companions that will go with us to the new country and even hang out there, it gets so uncomfortable that we go running for the old country time and time again. So it's a well-worn path. We know it very, very well. So a couple other characteristics that I want to contrast here. And the first one is how we go about handling our emotional displays, how we handle our emotions, just in general. And so in the old country, we control all emotional displays, and if they come out and show themselves in a very uncomfortable sort of way, we use shame to condemn them. So what does that look like? What that looks like is when my emotions begin to bubble to the surface and begin to overtake me in the situation that I am in. As a general rule, the first things out of people's mouths oftentimes is, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." So we apologize for the very emotions that we have. And then internally, what we do is that we then turn the condemnation on ourselves and say, what a loser I am that I can't even control what's going on inside of me so that it doesn't come out and it doesn't make people uncomfortable. And that condemnation that I say to myself, that narrative that I engage in about handling my emotions, it sounds a little bit like, I am so weak. If I was stronger, I would be able to handle this stuff. Or I'm falling apart. Or I'm out of control. Or I'm so needy. Or I'm making people so uncomfortable. Or I can't seem to hold all my crap together. Any one of those things is all a way to stuff these things down so that what? One, I don't have to deal with it because I can just make believe that it's not there. And two, I'm not going to be making anybody else uncomfortable. Now, if I begin to stuff these things, I mean, what's the phrase we often use, right? It's shove it under the rug, quote unquote. But the problem is that the more I shove things under the rug, sooner or later, I'm going to have to get a bigger rug to cover the massive mountain of stuff and emotions that I put underneath there. See, something that I have discovered is and I've seen over and over again, even in counseling, people come into counseling and share their soul. I mean, they share their hearts, and oftentimes the tears begin to come, and almost reflexively they say, I'm sorry. Let me get myself back together again. But maybe instead of it being a matter of falling apart, maybe I'm finally things are falling back into place the way they were supposed to be. Because in the new country, it's not about keeping people comfortable about my emotions. It is allowing the emotional displays of what's going on within me without shame. Without shame, because they're a part of being human. You see, when we apologize for the emotions that we have, which is also part of the image of God in us, God's an emotional God. He shows his emotion on a regular basis if you read through Scripture. So if we apologize for that, what are we actually doing? We're apologizing for being human. And in a lot of cases, if somebody's going to be really honest with me, and me too, is that we say, yeah, being human sucks because I can't keep everything under control so I don't garner too much attention with all this emotion that I have. See, one thing that I've learned over the years, and I see it in myself. I mean, there's a lot of this stuff that I talk about in the podcast and in my classes and that I share about myself. And one of the things that the class that I'm currently teaching is grief and loss. And probably one of the most awkward, uncomfortable classes is the very first one when I start in on beginning to introduce the subject and all that we're going to be talking about and the nature of what's going on and the nature of grief and loss and all of that stuff. But the way I go about doing that is that I share my own story. Now, some background here. Why do I do that? I mean, why? You know, a professor is supposed to be talking about the subject matter that they're supposed to be talking about, right? They're not supposed to be talking about themselves. And I've always found that fascinating because I think it is in the service of separating me from the content that I am supposed to be teaching about. And how in the world do we breathe life into something for me as a teacher if it's not part of my inner world? Because then it becomes just something just to master. It's just information, and I gain it to what end? To help other people. Okay, I got that. I mean, I'm not downgrading at all the importance of the content that I teach and the things that I talk about. At the same time, it needs to be incorporated, you might even say integrated into who I am, as well as something that I teach. Because so many of my students and the people that might even be listening here to this podcast have some desire oftentimes to not only understand themselves, but also be able to help other people, to walk beside them with empathy and with compassion and being able to listen and be present and all of those sorts of things. And this particular characteristic of controlling emotional displays and using shame to condemn it versus allowing emotional displays without shame, which means I have to find a way to move toward into the new country of accepting my humanness. Now, that is not, hear me out, that is not just ignoring and distorting the importance of my fallenness and my brokenness that can really mess things up really, really badly. In church language, that would be sin. So I'm not sidestepping that at all. So living with my humanity is living with my limitations, living with the reality of sin in my life and how it operates, not only the state of sin, but how it acts, how it moves out of me into the actions that I take and the things that I say and the way that I relate and all of that. But there is no need to apologize for my humanness in order to be known. As a matter of fact, accepting my humanness requires me to embrace grace, does it not? Because accepting my humanness doesn't mean I'm condoning and saying, "Oh, it's okay, don't worry about it, it'll be fine." Because that's not part of the deal, if you want to put it that way. I mean, every time Jesus came into contact, now think about this, Jesus, the sinless one, Jesus, God incarnate, interacted with humans who were profoundly broken by their lives and the choices that they made and everything else. And most of his interactions with people, whether implied or otherwise, communicated his love and acceptance of them as they were. And at the same time, meeting them there, saying, "I accept you as you are. You're not going to find condemnation for me," but then challenging them to live life differently. And not only that, just, go get them, tiger kind of thing. It's like, I'll walk with you. I'll help you, which I think is a model for us as well to do the same thing with each other. Is if we're in a live and let live kind of mindset, we're not going to care enough about the other person to possibly challenge their thinking. Now, that doesn't always mean what I call propositional truth. I mean, calling somebody out, quote unquote, would be challenging their thinking, but that's not always what people need. I mean, I can challenge somebody's thinking just simply by remaining in their lives because they see themselves as so condemned and so unwanted and unloved that just me being present and staying challenges their thinking. See, we always get focused on and taken with what profound things I can say to them that will change their lives, and everything will get better, and I can stand here in the stands and cheer for them. And this is the split between what oftentimes I call profundity, saying something profound, versus being present with the person. And I would say Jesus started with presence, and out of that came the profundity that changed people's lives, still calling them to a changed life, doing things differently. And so often that's what he said to people is go and sin no more. Now, he's not crazy or dumb enough to think that they won't sin. But in a lot of ways, he was saying, with the grace that I'm offering you by being present with you, listening and understanding your life and how it is, you might want to consider or reconsider not only how you think about things and yourself and your choices, but think about not only thinking differently, but also move in another direction. Because whenever you see the word repent, it is always about a thinking process that changes and then a directional change that occurs. So it's both and. It's not an either or. I mean, I can change my thinking and do absolutely nothing, and there's no proof that my thinking is actually changed. On the other hand, I can change my behavior, and it will look like my thinking has changed, when in fact that hasn't changed either. So it really is a matter of where we start when it comes to making these kinds of changes, even when it comes to how we handle our own emotions. Because it seems to me oftentimes we have much more grace with somebody else's emotions than we do with our own. And so, as Brene Brown often says, is your vulnerability is admirable, but mine is reprehensible. It means I'm weak. And that same thing, I mean, what's the height of our vulnerability is when we express what our emotions are and show them as they are, not a sanitized version of them or something that it's wrapped around or a reason that we give for it or whatever it might be. Just allowing it to be and allowing myself to be. Now, that doesn't mean I do it with everybody. It doesn't mean I get onto the nearest bus and then just tell somebody my entire life story. But at the same time, I can't use that as a thing to avoid to do the opposite and do nothing. So in the old country, there's a control of emotional displays. We use shame to condemn it and to condemn ourselves. And when we go to the new country where there's freedom and grace, there's an allowance for emotional displays to be shown without shame. And, what does that look like? And as I was saying, and I don't think I completed the thought, is that, my first class is usually probably the most awkward of the classes because I tell my own story. And inevitably, with telling that story, I get choked up. I tell the story of my dad dying when I was a 12-year-old and how difficult that was and the 10-year war I set out on with God for taking my dad from me and all of those things. And I would put pictures up so that people could get an idea of what my relationship with my dad was like and etc. And looking at those pictures, inevitably, the tears often come. And I'm not any more surprised by them. I think sometimes when people see that, it's like, wait, what's wrong here? I thought you were over it. But see, my tears are no testimony to the fact that I'm not healed. If anything, they're testimony to my love for missing the person that I dearly, dearly loved. And that happens with another person that was part of my life. And that was my mother-in-law, and I show pictures, and I get choked up, and the tears come, and as they rightfully should be, because as I say, tears are a testimony to my love. I don't get upset about things I don't care about, and that is true with the freedom that comes with showing our emotions as they are. Now, the other characteristic that divides the old country and the new, in the old country, we use other people as an excuse to avoid ourselves. And that can come in a lot of forms. I mean, it can come in making a mistake. Somebody gives us feedback about it, and we crumble and melt into a gelatinous mess of shame and worthlessness and valuelessness, and I'm no good and I can't do anything right, and et cetera, et cetera. But where's all the focus is that if the other person starts feeling uncomfortable and saying, wow, I better not give them feedback because this is what happens, and I don't want that to happen, so after all, I'm not going to do that. So in that case, others are in charge of me dealing with myself. And in a lot of cases, I point out the fact that shame used that way can insulate us from getting the feedback we need to grow. So I can use others as an excuse to avoid myself and what's going on in me, what I don't want to look at, what I don't want to see. Or the other alternative is what I see a lot of helpers go through, is that we use others to help other people and to put them first and to be focused on them and all of that sort of thing. But we use that unwittingly. I don't think it's intentional often. Sometimes it is. But we use that to avoid looking at the landscape of our own hearts. And so we're really good at helping people feel cared for and supported and encouraged, but we're not willing to look at our own hearts and what's going on in there. So we end up using others to avoid looking at ourselves. So what's the alternative? So I head off and I've done this enough and I get burned out because I just run out of energy. And I say, there's got to be a better way. And somebody says, oh, by the way, there's this place, it's called the New Country, where grace and freedom reigns, and you might want to check it out. It's really pretty good and better even. But when we get there, there's an encouragement. I could even go so far as to say a culture to embrace myself as I am, with all the flaws, all the weaknesses, all the shortcomings that I typically would condemn myself about, but to embrace all of it. But that also means not just the the degrading parts of us that we want to focus on, but it also means accepting the compliments, even the encouragement, the words of encouragement we get about the things we do well, that gifts other people, that impacts their worlds in positive ways. So embracing myself doesn't always mean getting down on myself or embracing the worst parts of me. It's part of it, but it's not the only thing. And what I then do is now, once I own myself enough to embrace all of who I am, I now have something to share with safe people in my life. Now, like I said, I need to exercise discernment about the people who are safe and who I need to invest that information in. Not everybody does, and people need to demonstrate to us that they are safe people. I can't share vulnerable information with another person and make them safe by doing that. That's setting myself up because I haven't done the necessary work to understand the nature of the person I'm interacting with. The best relationships are incremental in their nature. We share a little bit about ourselves. The other person shares the same, or they meet it with compassion, and then they share some things with us. And we begin to see that they're committed to growth and knowing themselves enough to be able to give themselves to other people in relationships. And growth occurs and depth occurs as a result of that. And that's in the New Country. So when we conduct and build those kinds of relationships, they're not only significant and fulfilling, but they go deep. And they last a long time because there's been a significant commitment to not only embracing myself enough so that I have something to give away. And give away is not only serving other people, but it's also allowing myself to be known, which isn't always comfortable. The worst part about it is, quite honestly, is that they will give me grace for things that I find it hard to give myself grace. And when that happens, there's a clash. Because I say either they're lying to me or I'm lying to me. And I don't think I lie to me. We always give ourselves the benefit of that doubt. So therefore, then I'm surrounded by people that are lying to me and just being nice. And that's insulting to other people, for one. But for another, it makes it so that I am now not only lonely in a group of people, but now I'm alone because of my unwillingness to accept myself as I am. The greatest growth, I would go even one step further and say the greatest potential for growth starts with accepting myself as I am. Because then I can make headway armed with grace and with freedom and truth, all the things that we've been talking about, armed with those things to be able to take steps in a different direction. And that's the focal point here. So there you have it. That's it for tonight. It's two different aspects that distinguish the old country from the new. One, how we control our emotional displays in the old country is with shame and condemnation. And in the new, we allow it and experience the freedom of these emotional displays without shame. And the second one is we don't use others to avoid looking and dealing with and accepting ourselves. In the old country, we do that. In the new, we embrace ourselves as we are, flaws and all, and share that with safe people in our lives, which actually allows us to gain and begin to accept even more grace because they offer it to us. It allows us to attend to our own hearts. And the thing I will end with is this, is I can't give away what I don't own. And so if I don't own my own heart, which includes accepting and removing the condemnation from various parts of my life, then I can't give that away. And, some people would say, well, why would I want to give that away? I mean, that's awful. On the other hand, it makes growth potential. There's a potential for growth when I do something like that. So enough. I could go much further. I could rant a little more. I don't think I want to do that. That's enough for one evening. Thanks so much for joining me tonight. A few reminders at the end here. Subscriptions to the website or to our social media channels, just to be able to be updated for new podcast episodes that will be coming out. You can subscribe on the website in the upper right-hand corner. You subscribe to the website, and then any content that hits the website, you will be notified of, and you can join in the online party of the material and content and the things that are going on at kind of the digital home for the Psych Monologues. The website is called A Dangerous Community. And it's the place where we talk about things that make us, quote unquote, dangerous people to the people that want to hide. And that doesn't mean dangerous in the violent sense or anything of the sort. It's just that we begin to understand how to define safety differently. That's what I mean by that. Okay, so subscriptions on the website, drmitch.com, or on Instagram at the Psych Monologues, all lowercase, Facebook, ray.mitch, LinkedIn, drmitch, are the major social media platforms that the podcast is getting pushed out to every time I release one. You can also subscribe at Podbean. I don't know how many people know about Podbean, but But you can subscribe there at raymitch.podbean.com. They have a player. But we're also available on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, Amazon Music. So anywhere that you listen to podcasts, you can find the Psych Monologues, and I would encourage you to come back and listen to some more. There will be more to come. Finally, last but not least, the Psych Monologues also exists to encourage people to consider how they can partner with me and CCU to put on the silent retreats that we do twice a year at CCU. Silence and Solitude is an ancient tradition in the Christian faith. It has fallen on bad times, except in certain quarters of the Christian faith. And I discovered it, and I began to take students, and they too found a exceedingly unique experience because it was rediscovering the ancient and realizing just how contemporary it was. So if the things that I talk about in the podcast and some of the values and things that we will be releasing in this year about the silent retreats, if that gets your heart going a little faster and you want to partner with us, please do. You can find a GoFundMe site on the website under the CCU tab and go down to silent retreats and you'll find it there. Please partner with us. Anything you can give us to help support students going to our silent retreats would be immensely helpful, making it possible for many of them to go, simply because of the cost that just can't be afforded by a college student in school. So the one that's coming up is April 8th through the 11th, 2021. We will be confirming dates for fall of 21 and spring of 22. So keep an eye on the website. There's a sign-up form there that you can fill out and indicate your interest in registering. And then I will keep you informed of, or me or one of the team that helps me will keep you informed of what the status is and what the cost will be and how to go about officially registering so we can have you actually on the list. So I think that's it. I've gone a little long. My apologies, but thank you so much for joining me. And as always, love you. Later. Bye.